Hello, I'm Deborah Wesley in conversation with Glenn Foy. Glenn, Jung's work has been part of your life for a very long time. How did that start? Can you tell us about what you think first brought you to this work in the first place?
Yes, I can, but it's a very, very long story. It's really my history for my first 30 years, or 32 years of my life. I was raised in Hutchinson, Kansas, a small city of about 30,000. And as I later found out, I was on the edge of the Bible Belt, which I didn't realize at all when I was growing up. And I was the youngest of 5 children. I had 3 brothers and an older sister who I admired very much, even though I was always treated as the youngest brother. And as an astrologist once said to me, that I was raised in a very mechanically functioning environment, which I was. Since most of our life, when I was there, circled around the church in some way. It was a Methodist church. And part of it is really believing fully in the church doctrines. The life as it was expressed at that, no questioning, which I'm almost ashamed of it later on, but there was no questioning. The family was interested in sports, in guns, and we had a very strong work ethic. Well, I mean, there wasn't really any kind of spiritual, well, there was, the spiritual life was so-called with the church, which I don't think was very spiritual. And so there was none of that, not much culture, arts, those kind of things. So I was raised in that. And then around the age of 7 or 8, 90 years ago, can you believe that? That I had a series of repetitive dreams. And I remember them very well. And the dream was that I was asleep in my dream, and then a very large snake was under the house, under even the concrete floor of the basement, and the snake started shaking, started moving, and it shook the house and woke me up. And I was a little boy. I was terribly frightened. I feel that that was sort of the beginning for me of needing to move out of this kind of environment. It was shaking things up. Of course, it was a snake with all kinds of symbolism, but it was more, for me at that time, just very, very frightening. And I never told anybody, but I had it several nights at different times around that age. It makes me think of how it seems to me that there have been people in my life, things, fate in my life that has always brought me back to a path of getting to Jung, but it took many years.
And the snake started it.
The snake was the first awareness, I think, now, and looking back, that I had of it. And then the next big thing that happened to me along this way, that at first I took engineering because my dad and my brothers all were engineers. So there was nothing left for me to do but be an engineer, which I didn't like, but I felt I had no other choice. But in in University of Kansas. I had my good friend was there, and in the summer before my senior year, he talked me into going flying. And he had taken a course that taught flying, and he had a hard time because I didn't want to go. I wasn't interested, supposedly, in flying, but he finally talked me into going. We went up in the air, and I looked down and saw this small town, and it was like, I think it would be an epiphany, because I've wanted to learn to fly, and I knew that I was going to fly, so that after the summer, I went back to the university, I signed up for a flying course. Now there again is something kind of interesting to me, because the government had chosen just 30 universities throughout the country, or colleges throughout the country, to have a flying course, trying to get the young men into learning to fly.
What year are we in here?
This was in 1939. And of course, when I got back, I immediately signed up for the course and learned to fly. But also while I was doing that, I decided not to be an engineer if possible. I mean, I went ahead and graduated in engineering, but I wanted to become an airline pilot. So the only way I could afford to become an airline pilot was, like many others, I could go into the service, get my training in flying, and then after I served my time, I would be able to apply for the airline. So I did that, and I had already signed up for the Navy, and I went into flying as a profession. Now there's the interesting thing about it is that my friend never flew again. He had taken the course, flew once with me, and never flew again. And I ended up going into it as a profession. I don't understand it. I've often wondered. The question always, why me? Why didn't he do it? Or anyhow, I felt later that this was also then trying to direct me on my path of getting me out of my family and now out of Kansas. So I went into the Navy. Things changed because very shortly, I mean, it was a year and a half after I went into the Navy that the war started. Yeah. And that changed everything.
What did the Navy want you to do?
Well, they taught me to fly. And I realized at that point, or somewhere along the way, that the government was way ahead of all the people. Here in this, the population had no idea that we would be going into the war. But somebody in the government knew that we would be eventually, and started all this thing of the classes at these 30 universities to get young men interested in flying, and then maybe join the military or be ready for it anyhow. Well, they sure hooked me, because I was one of those guys that took up flying and then went into the Navy. Later, I realized it was really I was very fortunate, because by the time the war started, I was an officer and a flyer, and that made all the difference in the world. In the Navy, I was stationed at Corpus Christi, Texas. Since they had taught me before the war started to fly, then they sent me to, the Navy, sent me to a flight training school where I learned to teach flying. So I was sent then, after going through that, to Corpus Christi, Texas, and at the Naval Air Station there, to teach others to fly. So I was teaching people to fly. And here I was at the station, nice and safe, and the others were dying. While I was there, I developed a very good friendship with a man called Einar Larson. He was of my rank. I was a little senior to him. But we became very, very good friends. He was from the West Coast. I was from Kansas. And after 2 years down there, the Navy decided to ship us out and asked us where we wanted to go, which meant nothing because they didn't care. But they still, it was on our evaluation sheet. He always asked for the West Coast because he wanted to come out here. I wanted to go through the East. I guess I wanted to go to Europe if I was shipped anywhere. So the day we both got new orders on the same day, his orders said the East Coast, mine said the West Coast, just opposite to what we wanted. And of course, we had to follow them. 6 months later, I was on the West Coast, the squadron here, and he was in Europe and got killed. I have felt something of a guilt because ever since then, because he was married, he had a baby, a child, and a second one on his way. I had nothing, no parents. I had my siblings, but
Your parents had died?
My parents had died. So I felt really guilty that he had to go. And these kids without a father, this was almost too much. So there again, I wondered, that's the first time I really wondered, why me? Why did he have to go and not I? When I was out here on the West Coast waiting for new orders to go out to the Pacific, I got my orders, and I was ordered to what they called a Black Cat squadron. This Black Cat because we were flying Catalinas, as they were called, a seaplane, and they painted them black because our mission was to fly over the Japanese-held islands way out here in the Pacific and drop bombs at night. And it was really pretty much of a death sentence for those that had to do that because they were slow planes and flying low at night. They were almost always shot down. So I remember I just about passed out. I went to my room and just lay on my bed and thought my life was over.
When you got the orders?
When I got those orders. So it took about 2 or 3 days before I was to go. The morning I was to go, I was packing, and somehow new orders came for me. And I picked them up, and they were to to a different squadron, a very safe squadron, really. And I couldn't believe it. I went to our commanding officer to see if what was going on, and he said they were my orders. Somebody else had gotten the ones that I had. Again, it made me feel guilty because I imagined I had come to a very safe, I was assigned to a very safe squadron, and I imagined the other man was killed. Again, why me? So I finally did get I took my orders. I was eventually stationed on a little island called Pitialoo out in the southwest Pacific. It's an island that's only big enough pretty much to have the airstrip and room for taking care of the airplanes in our squadron. It was there. I mean, war is a strange thing. You're either really busy thinking of things or trying to do things to protect yourself and do other things, or you had nothing to do in between those times. So one day on Pitialoo, I was walking around considering life and realized, really, that I wasn't at all satisfied with life, with the way my life was going. Not that I had much to do, I couldn't do anything about it at that time. And it had nothing to do with really the Navy, but I didn't like where I was. I, again, had nothing. I mean, nobody really depended on me or involved with me. So in walking around and thinking about this, I decided if I ever got back to the States alive, I was going to do something about it. I had not the remotest idea what I would be doing. I'd heard, of course, of psychoanalysis, I suppose, but that was only for crazy people at that time. And I remember one time my professor in psychology at the university had said, our dreams are due to something we ate that day. So that was sort of the attitude of dreams. Well, obviously, I did survive. I got back to the States. This is kind of a long story to get to what you asked me.
I think it's an important phrase.
It's important for me anyhow. So I got back. The war finally was over. I was discharged up in Seattle, and after discharge, I've never felt so lost in all my life, because for 5 years I had been told what to do, where to go, what to eat, almost even what to think. But there I was. What was I to do? And I, at that time, fortunately, had a brother living here in Pasadena, so I thought I will drive down there and see what happens, see where I would go from there. I suppose I was headed back to Kansas, which scares the life out of me. But anyhow, I got down here. I mean, it took me a few days, 2 or 3 days or so to drive down, and arrived at my brother's late one evening. He was, I think, glad to see me, well, who knows. But he also told me that just that day, his next-door neighbor had asked my brother if he knew of an architectural engineer that would be available for work, or was interested in work. My brother said to him that his brother, meaning me, was an architectural engineer because I had just graduated and then never practiced at all. But that I was coming down someday. He didn't even know when I was going to arrive and didn't know what I was going to be doing. But I was arriving. And so my brother told me that. The next day I went over to the guy's office, interviewed him and a few others, and got a job, was hired. In a way, I can't believe it because for 5 years I'd been trying to get out of engineering. But here I was after the war. I had to support myself. So it was a way of doing it. So I took up that engineering. Also during that week, I talked to my sister-in-law there in Pasadena and kind of realized that she was in some kind of exploration of her own, that I didn't know what it was, but I mentioned something to her about what I had thought of in Pitiloo, which has always been with me, that memory. And she got very excited and knew of course, knew of a person for me to see. And very shortly, the next day, I imagine, I had an appointment with this man that she knew. His name was Parl Welch. So within less than a week after my discharge, I was in analysis, I was working, and in something that I found out later was psychoanalysis, of Freudian psychoanalysis, which I didn't know one thing from another. But she was in analysis with this man, and so she had a big transference, obviously, and anyhow, I started going to him and was in psychoanalysis, a Freudian one, which was fine because that's just what I needed. And, well, again, then within a few months, she stopped analysis and has never gone back. So there again, she stopped, and I obviously took it up as a profession later. So I was with Parl for, a total of, I guess, of 4 years. But after a couple of years, I just realized he was sort of treating me a little different than he had been previously. I didn't know why. It didn't really bother me. So I didn't say a thing. But after that year, he one day said to me, "Would you like to attend a dream seminar?" And he said, then he kind of explained it to me, that he and a Jungian Analyst, and I had no idea at all, hadn't even heard of Jung at that point, but that he and this Jungian Analyst were going to collaborate on a dream seminar in which he, Parl, would furnish a patient's dreams, and that the Jungian Analyst and the group would be analyzing these dreams from a Jungian point of view. Well, I was a little hesitant, but also I was very interested, so I took it up.
Were you the patient?
No, it wasn't. No, it was not. I was invited to the seminar. I went, and there I met James and Hilda Kirsch. That was the first time I had ever met a Jungian that I know of. That I think I have been the only person ever invited to one of James's seminars that had never been in Jungian work before, or only knew Jung for about 2 weeks beforehand. So I started, I attended the seminar. After about that year, Parl decided to go to Zurich for the Jungian training over there. And when he left, I had been having dreams of Hilda, so I went to work with Hilda. That was my first Jungian analysis and Jungian contact. After being with Hilda for about 2 years, she suggested that I see James, which they did quite often between the two of them. So I saw James, and within a couple of months or so after starting to work with him, I started having dreams that he interpreted, and me too, that I needed to go into this work professionally. So this was in 1952, and so it meant at that time the only ones that could get into or do analysis were MDs and Ph.D.s. So I knew I had to get my Ph.D. So at 52, and being an engineer, I had almost only one class in psychology, so I had to go back to the junior level and start my psychology education. It took me 7 years to do that. So then, anyhow, I got my Ph.D., then I was admitted to the training program, and another 8 years or something like that, I became a certified analyst. So from the 1952, when I had my first dreams, to when I was really certified, it was 15 years. And that's the way I met Jungian analysts. Quite a story, huh?
I've heard it rumored that you met somebody else at this seminar.
I forgot that completely. So sorry. Because when I first went to that seminar, with all these strange people, I didn't know anyone except my analyst. And there in that seminar was a beautiful young woman. I was, I think, attracted right away, thinking I know it. But I saw that she had a wedding ring on, which I was really disappointed. But then I realized later that if she were in analysis, which you had to be in this seminar, that she must be having marriage problems. So I then sort of got a little more interested, got my hopes raised, and 5 years later we married. And I've been married ever since, and I'm very, very grateful. So that was a long story to get to that. But also, again, along the way, this friend, his flying, and my sister-in-law and others, like they were put in my path to redirect me into this direction that I was going. I had no idea of such a thing at the time, and maybe I'm all just kind of looking for it now, but I feel very definitely that my flying got me out of Kansas. In a way, I'm grateful for the war, which sounds horrible, but I don't think I would have gotten out without the flying and going into the Navy. So these things, and then my sister-in-law, and even Parl, a Freudian analyst, turning into the Jungian. I bet he was the only one in the city here in L.A. that did that. But that's why I feel so amazed with my path.
Well, your path now has taken you to the Jung Institute, and After that, you were very involved with the Jung Institute for, say, 40 years.
Yes, very involved.
What what stands just what stands out now when you think about that and those years there?
Well, there are really two important things that stand out. The first is that I was kind of instrumental, not kind of, I was instrumental in getting the bylaws of the Institute changed from requiring only or accepting only MDs and Ph.D.s, that we would accept people with master's degrees. I guess I could say I saw the Institute dying, it felt to me like, with these requirements.
Too hard to get in?
Well, too hard to get. Well, they had MDs or PhDs. And at that time, when I did this, psychology was a man's profession. But it was changing rapidly, and now we need more men.
Now it's weighted heavily the other way.
It's a weighted heavily. And that reminds me also that at that time, we were very close to San Francisco, in our institutes, and we would not make any real changes without consulting San Francisco. And when this came up, we waited to decide until we had consulted with San Francisco group. And in so doing, they finally said, well, they would agree for us to do it, but to be aware that probably someday it was going to change, or that women would be taking over. And they did.
I understand you were also responsible for letting kids into the Institute.
Yes, but that also came from a little help from you. I was president of the Institute. You were vice president. Hilda Kirsch was dying of cancer, which we all knew, and she was in the hospital. I said to you one day, we needed to do something in memory of Hilda, and what would you think to do? And you said, why don't you ask her? So I did, and immediately she came up with a children's clinic. There was a little struggle about that in the Institute, particularly in who we ended up with the director, Edith Sawald, since she had been in the training program at one time and then dropped out. There were so many of others, and it was also Hilda's request that, so I asked her who would
Edith be the director.
Who would she recommend as a director, and she said Edith. So it didn't go through easily. We really had to struggle to get some of these two things through. But they've lasted, and I'm very glad of it.
They certainly have, yeah. You know, during those years, you were doing a lot more besides wrestling with Institute politics. I wanted to ask you about a couple of things. One thing I want to ask you about is you became a stone carver.
A stone
and
carver.
how did that happen?
Well, the way
What does that mean?
Well, first I started taking clay molding, I should say, classes at the Art Institute, Otis Art Institute. And I liked that, but then I gave it up. I didn't do very much of it. But when I was 60, or about 60, around there, I had a patient that had been an artist in school, and when she came out, she went into secretary work, which she hated. But eventually, in working together, she really turned into a wonderful artist. She first took up clay, I believe. Then she went into stone carving herself, and even went over to Italy, the place where David came from, that town, in the stone, and took classes there, or courses, and really loved it. And came back, and well, she really talked me into it. I said how easy it was to learn, and I had no idea. I have lots of pieces around. I hated to give it up, but I just ran out of strength, and
Really?
it's hard enough. Well, I only have certain size pieces. I would have liked to have worked in big pieces, but they're just too heavy even, and I did not have the equipment to take care of such a thing. And it does require some pretty heavy equipment because those stones are really heavy. Anyhow, I liked it so much because it's almost like a meditation. You start with this big hunk of stone, and I did it all by hand, just chisels, hammer, and rasps, those kind of things. And it takes hours and hours and hours and lots of patience. But also, it made me, I was by myself, and I could think, and I really liked it. And I think it's just for me, it was just a very wonderful, I don't even want to call it a hobby, because it's more than a hobby, but it had great value for me.
That finding the time and the quiet kind of brings us to a whole other aspect, and it seems to me over in recent years you have said some very penetrating and important things about getting old and about old age, and I wonder if this might be a place where you might touch
Oh
on
boy, I'm so involved in old age that it's where my thoughts are almost all the time. I've come to realize, I think, that old age is a stage unto itself. Jung speaks of two stages of life, the first part and the second part, but I now propose a third part, that of old age. Because one, I think no one can understand old age without being there. Just recently, ran across quite an article by Ezekiel Emanuel, who's the brother of the mayor of Chicago and was also President Obama's first chief of staff. But he wrote an article, Why I Want to Die at 75. He has just the opposite point of view to what I'm saying, because in his article, I felt it was all just ego-oriented. I'm Superman, and I want to be Superman until I die. Until I die, I don't want to weaken at all, but just die when when I get to be 75. Even though already by that time one has started losing their strength.
Well, you have to say that he's only 60.
Oh, he is 58.
58.
Yes. And so I know that he has what I've experienced so often in my old age of people thinking old age shouldn't have to live through it. I disagree so much because it has brought so much to me in my own way of thinking, in my consideration of death and God and just the mystery of life. To have the time to ponder on this mystery, because we are all in such a, I mean, it is a big mystery. Shall I go on with that? Because,
I'd like to hear it.
okay.
Are you meaning old age and death is a mystery?
Yes, because, well, I've come around to it in such different ways. I begin to, from my engineering background, I realized how many millions of ancestors each one of us has. I mean, I started counting these up, and every generation you have two more at least. So in 14 or 15 generations, we have, I think, about 17 million ancestors. It multiplies very rapidly. What?
Can you spell that out a little more?
Well, we each have two parents. We have to have two parents. Every person has.
Oh, I see. So you're coming.
So then, going back, two parents, four grandparents, eight great-grandparents. Of course, it doubles every time, so that by the time you get not very far back, it's getting into really big numbers. And the amazing thing is that if any one of those millions had not produced or reproduced, we wouldn't be here. This person would not be here. Somebody else would be, but I would not be here, and I wouldn't even know it, which is the thing that stuns me the most. So that thinking of that ancestry, then looking forward, we must have eventually as many descendants or people that have touched us as our past does. I mean, all these millions back there, they've had millions more. So I feel that I've changed my attitude of eternal life from all this. That
Your Methodist attitude. Your Methodist attitude?
Yes, my Methodist attitude, you're right. It's such a drastic change from that, of course, as the Methodists, as well as, I guess, most Protestant churches, feel that we are resurrected and go into heaven. And some of them believe even we're bodily resurrected as well. I don't know what we're going to do up there if that would ever happen. I have many reasons of why I don't like the idea even of an afterlife. To think that, well, I've asked many people about this. One Freudian analyst, I guess I would call her, was about 100 when she was still practicing. And I asked her in a seminar once about what her belief in an afterlife was. And she said, well, she didn't believe in this Methodist stuff, but that she felt something continued on into an afterlife. I was satisfied with that for a while, and then I got to thinking all these thoughts, and it is not satisfying to me. But for me now, it all happens on this earth. We have a wonderful world, and we have wonderful people that we make contact with. And why would we want to go on into something, as a church, Methodist church says, into a place of mansions and of paradise and so much of a nicer life than here? I know some people could stand a better life. I'm going to live a tough one. But there is so much here. And then to think of going on somewhere else and not even know that you've already experienced and lived through this many years. How many years, you don't know. But that just doesn't anymore make sense to me. So that our eternal life is really what we have produced here on this earth. We have made contact with other people. We have affected other people. And that effect carries on.
That's the eternal part. Huh?
That's the eternal part.
You think about death?
I think about death a lot. It's always with me. And it's such a different attitude, too, that in earlier life, these people's lives, death is more considered an adversary. In our last stage, death is a part of life. We all have to experience it. But as a part of life, it becomes a friend. I feel death is a friend. It is time for me to die. Not that I want to necessarily, but I don't have any desire about living on. It is really, well, I like to live on, but as a goal to be 100, I don't have that. I feel that I want to live what I have, experience what I'm having, thinking about what I'm having, and that is really sufficient for me. And if other people do have other ways of comforting themselves for death, that's fine. I would not want to take that away from them. But I don't think anybody really thinks about it. So anyhow, that is so much a part of my thinking of death, and it's all right. Not, as I say, not that I want to die right away. I still have a few things to say, but it's time. And it's all right that it's time. So often when I speak to, or this in some way comes up with younger people, they always say, oh, you're going to live for a long time yet. That always irritates me because they don't know, I don't know, and I don't have that as a goal. I attribute to a great extent my connection to Jungian psychology for my attitude, even though this doesn't ever come up in analysis, but that Jungian psychology, not as a cause and effect, but Jungian psychology has connected me to my inner life, to my soul, to the mysteries of life which have no answer. And that's another thing about old age. We can ponder these questions. There is no answer, but it's a big mystery. But the mystery is part of what is so important and good in life, what makes life interesting. So
I don't know whether there's anything to say after that.
well, I would like just one more thing to say then. Years ago, I went to a play. The title was How Green Was My Valley. I don't know anything about the play now, but I find that kind of as a metaphor for me. And I at this time wonder or ponder, think about how green was my valley and how well have I served life. And that's it. Okay?
Tell us about, what about these?
Well, these start out just really rough, like they're just cut out of the quarry. And I first kind of get an overall pattern from it. Usually I don't know what it's going to come out. But I start with a heavy chisel and start knocking off pieces until it gets down to somewhat of a shape, and then I start using smaller and smaller chisels. Eventually, when it gets it really in the shape, and I want a smooth surface, I start using a rasp on it. After the rasp, use sandpaper, starting out with very heavy sandpaper, slowly making finer and finer sandpaper. After that is all done, I use a powder. I don't remember now what the name of the powder is. It's something I get from, well, Bouget Brothers. It's a very fine powder, and then I just go over it completely with that powder, and then it's done.
Are the forms as purely beautiful shapes, or do they have some?
Well, this one, you see, had these sort of two parts to it. All the rest, well, even that was just big, rough stone, but it had sort of a thing that gave me the feeling of wanting to have it come out the way it did.
So they're abstract shapes. They don't represent anything.
No, they're not. They're out.
That's what I was really trying to ask. Very beautiful.
Well, I do have some with real definite shapes, but none of these. I like the abstract more. You know, some guy came to the Institute, I think he's been there twice, that was teaching sculpturing, or I don't know what he was doing, but he was having a sculptor sculpt with these stones. He brought a whole series of just stones, and we had an all-day Saturday meeting. We each chose a stone and made something out of it. I think that was one, or maybe it's one I have in the garage. I don't think I've finished it, but it's very much like that. I just started. By the time the day was over, I was nowhere. Others had done something, but I kind of knew what I wanted by that time.
They speak well to going slowly and keeping it for a long time.
Do you see a mother and child in that?
Yes.
This is the mother holding the child. That's how I intended it. This is a soapstone. It was actually found out, a friend found it out in the desert and brought it back. That's an alabaster. This one started out just as a cube, complete cube. And I had the idea of putting 6 holes in it, non-intersecting holes, so that there's 2 here, 2 here, and 2 here. like all the way through, and without them intersecting. And I had the idea that I would have a little bit of a structure inside, but it wouldn't support it. But those holes, those 6 holes, don't intersect.
I don't know what that means.
Well, if I put 2 in here and 2 up there, they would intersect the holes. Well, anyhow,
Never be an issue.
nobody understands it. But anyhow, it's really good. And it's all one piece. I have these little strengtheners here because I'm afraid to take them out because it would supposedly stand with all these little pieces out. But I'm afraid to do it because I don't want the thing to collapse. But you can follow around. It goes all the way around. It never does. The one outside piece is really one piece.
No, I understand. I didn't get the word.
But as I say, I wanted a structure inside, but it wouldn't support it. And this is the way the stone looked when I first started, the base.
I think there's something really moving about seeing how the work started and how it came
It's
through
incredible.
through much work. Don't you think that's a
I do. I'm always so amazed that when it gets to this. This is stone, and this is smooth as it can be, and it's starting out with something like that.
very rough,
Yes.
like something in Kansas?
This piece is the only one that I really started out kind of knowing what I wanted to do. I had no idea it was going to look like that hardly, but I knew what I wanted to try anyhow.
It's such an idea that there should be this continuous
Yeah,
flow with no
break.
break.
And as I say, I wish I had the nerve to take those little pieces out, but I don't, because I'm too afraid it'll break, and then I'd break my heart.
Are you still doing this?
No, I don't have the strength. I can hardly pick up even that stone, to say nothing about, or that. Well, that was the end. The last piece I did.
Here is something that Glenn and Sue gave Glenn a spectacular 90th birthday party at which maybe 50-ish more people were for a dinner party. And at each person's place was a stone like this, which Glenn had carved.
It's a piece of Italy. It actually came from Italy. I mean, the stone did.
So needless to say, it's a very precious thing for very many people.
It was also very simple, because making 50 of them, I had to make kind of a simple thing.
Of course.